Channel EQ represents Ableton's answer to a simple question. What if you could have the streamlined EQ section from a professional mixing console on every track without the complexity of a full parametric equalizer? Introduced in Live 10.1, Channel EQ deliberately sacrifices surgical precision for something arguably more valuable in day-to-day mixing: speed and musicality. The design philosophy here mirrors what you'd find on a classic analog console's channel strip. You get a fixed high-pass filter for cleaning up low-end rumble, a low shelf for adding or removing weight, a sweepable mid-band for addressing the most common problem frequencies, and a high shelf for controlling brightness. That's it. No 8 bands to configure, no complex routing options, no analysis paralysis. The constraints are intentional. They push you toward making confident, broad tonal decisions rather than obsessing over whether you should cut at 317 Hz or 324 Hz. This matters because most mixing decisions don't require surgical precision. When a vocal sounds a bit muffled, you don't need to identify the exact frequency causing the problem down to the hertz. You need to make it clearer. When an acoustic guitar feels boomy, the solution is less low mids, not a forensic analysis of the room modes during recording. Channel EQ rewards this kind of thinking. It's designed for the first 80% of your EQ work, leaving EQ 8 for the remaining 20% where genuine surgical intervention becomes necessary. The high-pass filter sits at the left side of Channel EQ's interface and serves one essential purpose: removing low-frequency content that doesn't belong in a given track. With a fixed slope of approximately 18 decibels octave, sometimes reported as having 12 and 24 decibels options, depending on the source, it provides a reasonably steep roll-off that eliminates rumble without dramatically affecting frequencies just above the cutoff point. The frequency range is sweepable from approximately 20 Hz up through the low mid-range. Practical starting points include vocals at 80 to 120 Hz. Most vocal recordings contain no useful information below this range, only room rumble, mic handling noise, and plosive energy that muddies the low end. Acoustic guitar at 80 to 100 Hz, unless the guitar is meant to provide bass register support, rare in most arrangements. Everything below this range typically competes with bass and kick. Synth pads at 60 to 150 Hz, depending on arrangement density. In sparse arrangements, you might want the warmth. In busy mixes, filtering higher keeps the low end clean. Electric guitar at 80 to 120 Hz, amp cabinets often capture low frequency rumble that adds nothing but mud, and percussion and cymbals at 200 to 400 Hz for elements that exist purely in the upper frequencies. The high pass filter is arguably the most important tool in channel EQ, and one of the most underused by newer producers. On a typical mix with 30 or more tracks, applying appropriate high-pass filtering to everything except kick, bass, and perhaps a few low-frequency synth elements can dramatically improve clarity without any other processing. The low shelf operates at a fixed frequency around 100 Hz, providing broad control over the weight and warmth of your source material. Unlike a parametric band where you'd choose the exact frequency, Channel EQ makes this decision for you, and 100 Hz is a sensible choice. Sitting right at the transition between sub-bass and bass proper. Gain range is approximately plus or minus 15 decibels, though you'll rarely use more than a few decibels. Practical applications include adding warmth and reducing muddiness. Adding warmth plus 2 to plus 4 decibels brings out body and fullness in thin-sounding sources, useful on DI bass that lacks cabinet warmth, programmed drums that feel lightweight, or vocals recorded with a thin-sounding microphone. Reducing muddiness, minus 2 to minus 4 decibels, cleans up sources that accumulated too much low-frequency energy during recording, common on acoustic instruments recorded in boomy rooms, or any source where proximity effect added unwanted bass buildup. The fixed frequency means you're making broad tonal decisions, not surgical ones. If you need to cut specifically at 80 Hz while leaving 120 Hz untouched, you need EQ 8. But for general more weight or less boom decisions, the low shelf handles the job quickly. The mid-band is Channel EQ's primary corrective tool, a sweepable parametric band with adjustable Q, bandwidth, though more limited in range than EQ 8's equivalent. This is where you'll address the most common frequency problems: mud, boxiness, honk, harshness, and presence issues. Frequency range, sweepable across the mid-range, roughly 200 Hz 8 kHz usable range. Q, bandwidth, adjustable but more limited than EQ 8, encourages broader moves rather than surgical notches. Landmark frequencies and applications. Frequency, range character typical, move 200, 300. Hertz mud, boxiness cut 2-4 decibels to clean up boomy sources 300, 500. Hertz cardboard, hollowness cut to reduce boxy character in vocals and guitars 800. Nasal quality cut 2 to 4 decibels to reduce nasal or honky character once away. YTR 2 kHz presence. Bite boost for more attack. Cut if harsh or aggressive tube 4K intelligibility boost 2-4 decibels for vocal clarity and cut through 4 or 6 kHz edge. Sibilance region boost for articulation. Cut if harsh or sibilant. The mid band rewards quick, confident moves. Sweep the frequency while boosting to find problem areas. The boost and sweep technique. Then cut at that frequency. Or simply make a broad presence boost in the 2 to 4 kHz range if a source needs more clarity. The limited Q range prevents you from making extremely narrow cuts. If you need a surgical notch to remove a specific resonance, that's EQ8 territory. The high shelf operates at a fixed frequency around 4 to 5 kHz, controlling everything from upper presence through air and brilliance. This is your brightness control, simple and effective for broad tonal shaping. Gain range, approximately plus 15 decibels. Practical applications. Adding air and sparkle, +2 to +3 decibels opens up the top end, adding life and dimension to dull sources. Useful on vocals that lack presence, drums that sound muffled, or any source that needs to feel more alive and taming harshness. 2 to 4 decibels rolls off excessive brightness. Common on overly bright recordings, sources with digital harshness, or anything that feels fatiguing to listen to. The fixed frequency at 4-5 kHz means the high shelf affects both the presence range and the true high frequencies above 10 kHz. This is intentional. It's a more bright or less bright control, not a precision tool for adjusting specific frequency ranges. The output gain control compensates for any level changes introduced by your EQ moves. This parameter is critical for honest A/B comparison. Without level matching, louder always sounds better to our ears, leading to false positives when evaluating your EQ decisions. Best practice. After making EQ adjustments, bypass channel EQ and adjust the output gain until the bypassed and processed signals sound equally loud. Then evaluate whether your EQ moves actually improved the sound or just changed it. Channel EQ includes a real-time spectrum analyzer showing the frequency content of your signal. It's less detailed than EQ8's analyzer, lower resolution, fewer display options, but sufficient for quick visual reference. Important mindset: the spectrum display confirms what your ears identify. It doesn't replace listening. Use it to verify that your high-pass filter is actually removing the low-end content you intended to cut, or to see where a problematic resonance might be centered. But make your actual EQ decisions based on how the track sounds, not how the analyzer looks. Channel EQ embodies a specific mixing philosophy. Most tracks need simple, broad tonal shaping rather than complex surgical intervention. The device's constraints, fixed shelf frequencies, limited Q range, single mid-band aren't limitations so much as guardrails that keep you focused on musical decisions. Consider how a mixing engineer works on an analog console. They don't have unlimited bands and surgical Q settings on every channel strip. They have a high-pass filter, a few shelves, maybe 1 or 2 parametric mids. And yet, world-class records have been made on these consoles for decades. The limitation forces efficiency. Make a decision, commit, move on. This workflow translates directly to channel EQ. High pass first. Does this track need low-end content? If not, filter it out. Don't overthink the exact frequency, somewhere between 60 and 150 Hz for most non-bass elements. One shelf adjustment for overall tone. Does the track need to be warmer or brighter? Make a 2 to 3 decibel shelf adjustment and move on. One mid-band move for the most obvious issue. If something sounds wrong, muddy, honky, harsh, address it with the mid-band. If nothing sounds obviously wrong, don't make a move. Bypass and evaluate. Does the processed version serve the song better? If yes, commit. If you're unsure, undo it. The goal is developing perceptual confidence, the ability to quickly identify what a track needs and address it without second guessing. This comes from repetition and restraint, not from making more complex EQ moves. This exercise builds the broad stroke mixing skills that Channel EQ rewards. The time constraint is intentional, it prevents overthinking and forces instinctive musical decisions. Open a session with 5 to 6 tracks, drums or drum bus, bass, keys and synth, vocals and guitars, or another melodic element. Load Channel EQ on each track and set a timer for 2 minutes per track. For each track, you have exactly 2 minutes to make 3 decisions. Decision 1, high pass filter. Does this track need low end content? If it's not kick, bass, or low synth, engage the high pass filter and set it somewhere appropriate. Don't agonize over the exact frequency. 80 Hz for most things, higher if the track lives in the upper frequencies, lower if it needs some warmth. Decision 2, one shelf adjustment. Does this track need to be warmer with a low shelf boost, leaner with a low shelf cut, brighter with a high shelf boost, or darker with a high shelf cut? Make one shelf move of 2 to 4 decibels. If the track sounds tonally balanced already, skip this step. Decision 3, one mid-band move. Is there an obvious problem frequency? Mud around 300 Hz, honk around 800 Hz, harshness around 3 kHz? Address the single most obvious issue with a 2 to 4 decibels cut or boost. If nothing jumps out as problematic, don't make a move. When the timer goes off, stop. Move to the next track regardless of whether you feel done, no going back to previous tracks during the exercise, and bypass each channel EQ after you finish and honestly evaluate. Did your moves improve the track? This exercise trains several critical skills. Rapid tonal assessment, where you'll develop the ability to quickly identify what a track needs or doesn't need. Confidence in decisions, where the time pressure forces you to trust your instincts rather than second guess. Restraint, where when you only have 2 minutes, you learn that most tracks need very little EQ, maybe just a high pass filter and nothing else. And the 80-20 principle in action, where you'll discover that simple, broad EQ moves handle most mixing needs. After completing the exercise on all tracks, listen to the full mix. You'll likely find it sounds noticeably better, cleaner low end, better tonal balance, despite or because of the simple, quick approach. Channel EQ isn't designed for removing narrow resonances, making precise notch cuts, or detailed frequency sculpting. If you find yourself wishing you could make the cue narrower or add more bands, that's a signal to switch to EQ8. The fix. Use channel EQ for broad tonal shaping, the first 80% of EQ work. When you encounter a specific problem that requires surgical precision, a resonant frequency that rings on certain notes, a narrow band of harshness, add EQ8 for that specific task. Many professional mixers use both, channel EQ on every channel for basic shaping, and EQ8 only where surgical intervention is genuinely required. The high-pass filter is arguably the most valuable tool in channel EQ, yet many producers leave it bypassed by default. Low-frequency buildup from multiple tracks is one of the most common causes of muddy, undefined mixes. The fix: develop the habit of engaging the high-pass filter on every track except kick, bass, and intentionally low-frequency elements. Start with a moderate setting, 80 to 100 Hz for most sources, and adjust only if you hear something missing. You'll be surprised how much clarity this simple step adds to your mixes. It's tempting to develop a default EQ setting, high pass at 80 Hz, slight low shelf cut, presence boost at 3 kHz, and apply it to everything. This approach ignores the reality that every recording is different. The fix: before making any EQ move, listen to the track in context and ask, what does this actually need? If you can't articulate the problem in plain language, the vocal sounds muffled, the guitar is too boomy, don't make an adjustment. EQ should solve identified problems, not apply generic improvements. When a track lacks presence or clarity, the instinct is often to boost the high shelf. But if the source is already bright, this creates harshness rather than clarity, and harshness is one of the most fatiguing qualities in a mix. The fix: if a track needs more presence but is already bright, try cutting competing frequencies, mud in the low mids, boxiness in the 300 to 500 Hz range, rather than boosting highs. Often, removing what's masking the clarity is more effective than adding more top end. Our ears perceive louder signals as better, more exciting, more detailed, more present. If your EQ moves add overall level, which is common with boosts, bypassing will make the processed signal sound better simply because it's louder. The fix: always use the output gain to match levels before evaluating your EQ decisions. Bypass the plugin, listen, then engage it and listen again. If the levels aren't matched, your comparison is meaningless. Understanding when to use each EQ is essential for an efficient mixing workflow. You need speed. Channel EQ's simplified interface means faster decisions. For first-pass mixing where you're shaping 30-plus tracks, this efficiency matters. You're making broad tonal adjustments. Warmer, brighter, less muddy, more present. These are channel EQ decisions. The track sounds generally good but needs minor shaping. Well recorded sources often need only a high pass filter and perhaps one shelf adjustment. Buonshunting mi Chenyan, and you want to encourage musical decisions over technical ones. The constraints push you toward confident broad moves. You need surgical precision. Removing a specific resonance at 437 Hz with a narrow Q is EQ8 territory. You need multiple problem frequency corrections. If a track has issues at 200 Hz, 800 Hz, and 3 kHz, you need more bands than channel EQ provides. You need MS processing. Cutting low frequencies from the side channel, boosting high frequencies in mid only. These require EQ8's channel modes. You need detailed spectrum analysis. EQ8's analyzer provides higher resolution and more display options for forensic frequency work. And you need specific filter slopes. EQ8 offers 12, 24, and 48 decibels octave options for high pass and low pass filters. Channel EQ's slopes are fixed. Many experienced mixers use both EQs in combination. Channel EQ on every channel for basic shaping, high pass filtering, broad tonal adjustments, and EQ8 added only where needed for surgical corrections, MS processing, or detailed problem solving. This approach maximizes efficiency. You're not configuring 8 bands on every track when 3 or 4 simple controls would suffice, but you retain access to surgical precision when genuinely required. Channel EQ succeeds by doing less. Its fixed frequencies, limited bands, and simplified controls aren't compromises, they're features that push you toward faster, more musical mixing decisions. The device rewards confidence over caution, broad strokes over surgical precision, and trusting your ears over analyzing your spectrum display. For most tracks and most mixes, Channel EQ provides everything you need: a high pass filter to clean up low end clutter, shelves to adjust overall warmth and brightness, and a midband to address the single most obvious frequency problem. When you encounter situations requiring more precision, and you will, EQ8 stands ready, but reaching for the complex tool should be the exception, not the default. The 2-minute exercise isn't just a training drill, it's a model for how efficient mixing actually works. Identify what the track needs, address it with the simplest appropriate tool, commit, and move forward. The best mixes often sound effortless precisely because the mixer didn't overthink every decision. Channel EQ is built for that workflow.